reserve and offering that up on the pretext that if they opted out, that would be reimbursed. And so all these variables were constantly in play. The danger of providing, as these were being vetted, and of course Janet took off to get married, right in the midst of all this, but the danger that we run in terms of producing, these numbers are critical. They're critical for everybody. And so producing a number or a scenario that is subject to change is a very uncomfortable thing, because it creates in the public's mind and council's mind, okay, that's changed from what you originally told me. What else is going to change? And so what we were trying to work towards was to try and formalize those numbers, and the best we could do is what this report provides, is a snapshot at this time with these assumptions made. So it is subject to some variation. So the proposed options considered were option 1 and option 2, this is full and double train. We get to the actual analysis, and as this speaks to what I was just referring to, the assumptions that had to be made by us in order for Watson to run the numbers. So in running the numbers, it's not an isolated analysis of this project only. It's an analysis based on our 10-year capital forecast for wastewater needs, including such things that I highlight here. There's a considerable amount of money that council has forecast in the 10-year forecast for the development of the West Pasanquet collection system and force main that runs from Kettle Point to the forest treatment plant. That's projected for concept purposes in those overall forecasts. So they need to know how to represent that. The second note makes reference to monies that have already been paid by the partnership for the preliminary design and review and consultation process, and how that should be treated when they run push play for the scenarios to be factored in. And so Janet and Gary, before Janet left, had come to an agreement that it would be best to remove, for the analysis purpose, the monies that were already incurred between 2008 and 2011, so that you have the hard, I guess the best term is a net number, Janet?
The numbers weren't removed, they were just hidden in columns for display. So the numbers are still there through the whole model. It was just what was displayed as a table column.
And lastly was the note about, for the purpose of the single double train assumption, what was made for this purpose to run the scenario, because it costs money to do this, was that Blue Water was not participating, so it was a kind of a worst case scenario. Zones 3 and 4 were not participating, and that's an assumption made because the ad hoc committee was still deliberating and it's still not submitted a report, and so it was felt best not to reflect anything or factor that into the calculation. And in that period of time, I know we explored with South Huron through our committee what their level of participation would be, and I believe the mayor talked to the mayor of South Huron with respect to would they be, and they reaffirmed basically that they're in for a single train level of funding period. So with those, we ran the numbers, and I tried to net it out to make it for a person like me to understand that the full bill double train. I don't have to read the report for you. Netted out to an increase of about $240 annually for the 20. Again, it was narrowed down to the 2,731, whatever it is, current sewage system users. That's what the impact would be annually for this full build plant, given those factors. We felt it was worth noting that Blue Water has not defined whether they're in or out. They still have that option for up to 10 years to opt back in. And so I wanted to reflect of that $242, that $56 of that is funding that portion that Blue Water may or may not contribute, and what the impact of that is. Similarly, we did the same summary for the full build single treatment train, which worked out to $134 per sewer system users only, or $11.17 monthly, and of that $117, $30 is attributable to carrying that Blue Water weight. If they opt in, that's taken care of. If they opt out, we replacement and incur those costs. Another factor that we were trying to, an issue that had to be addressed in terms of the financial analysis was the issue of the operating budget. And as you know, in the joint agreement, the budget reflected a gross amount, and it's a projection that we use for the purpose of the mediation process and narrowing things down. An annual operating budget for the three partners of 1.4 million dollars, rounded out. Of that, the largest component was $968,000, which would be a contribution to life cycle replacement by the three partners of the facility. Now, in discussions with Mr. Scanlon at the December 13th meeting, he talked about this issue about, well, you can factor in the life cycle replacement as well at the time you're paying down the debt. That's a bit of double a whammy for your ratepayers. And his recommendation was that you pay down your debt first, and then as you're retiring your debt, you keep your payment levels up and start directing those payments to the life cycle replacement. So we looked at that in terms of what would the operating budget impact be for this municipality and for the joint board. It netted out to around $450,000. Again, that's shared proportion by the three partners. And I think I made reference to it ultimately on the premise that all the collection systems are in and everybody's participating and contributing. It would be proportion on that basis. But we know early on, going in, it's going to be on the shoulders of Lambton Shores and South Huron to cover those flow costs. And as those are shifting, they're in flux as well. And that's why my reference to 217 was simply a gross, an estimate of the gross budget. At the previous to last tri-municipal board meeting, the technical committee was asked to go back and review the operating budget in terms of cost, because it was done, as I said, in 2010 in the midst of for the mediation, and it hadn't been refined. And if you notice in the budget, there's an administrative component as well for managing the joint board and so on and so forth, and we believe that we operate on a pretty lean basis up to this point in time, where we provide secretarial services and we rotate that amongst each other. We speculated on that we might need to either hire somebody on a part-time basis to act as the secretary treasurer of the board, of the joint board, that we require. So there's a lot of variables in play that would still be at the discretion of the joint board if it was moving forward on the budget as to how to address those issues. So we had to land somewhere for this analysis to come forward, and that's part of the discussion, and it's still ongoing. I mentioned the hydro costs simply to point out that we have included, if you proceed with the green municipal funding for the passive and active solar recovery and the methane capture and all the other ability to generate energy from that facility, that you possibly could apply for a fit grant and so on and so forth. So again, we would pursue any and all options, but our experience came from when our current operator took over the system. They were able to really cut back on energy costs for the operations. That was for the forest and our Kona plants. So it's still, the jury's out. It's always best to play it safe and say, let's estimate on the high side. And the next part of the report really discusses the Bill Canada, and we've had some discussion in the Green Municipal Fund grants. My discussions have always been, and they're increasing in intensity, inquiries from both agencies. Where does this project stand, and so on and so forth, because they have a lot of people banging at the door saying, if there's residue in the fund, we want access to it. And so we've indicated to them, we're working our way through it, be patient. As you know from the grant, it has a pretty large window, 2000, I think it's April or 2016, so you've got to back out that construction time, and so we've got some room in which